Hello, it is time to start plants. So I pray that you did your bell work at the top of your notes, and let's get started. What do plants need to survive? Pretty simple. At this point, you should kind of sort of know because of all the cellular respiration and photosynthesis equations and things we've been working on over the past a while, okay? So sunlight, water, and minerals, gas exchange. They need gases in their roots and their leaves, and transporting those nutrients, those minerals, that they get and make to different parts of the plant. So those are all the things that plants need, okay? So you have a diagram in your notes. Start filling that out now, please. It's only 4 words: roots, stems, leaves, and flowers. It's the diagram of the plant, the flower. So you should have that done by now. Okay. And then you have this leaf that you have to label in your notes as well. So we're focusing on one piece of that previous picture. And the words are right there, so just start filling them in. The only one I added to that picture was what's on the next slide. So you can hold off on that weird looking eyeball looking thing for now, okay? And get that done on the next slide. Because you did leaf anatomy already, but you did the internal structure. Like if you took this leaf and turned it on its side and looked at it sideways, you saw the different layers. All right, so this is the next slide. So that picture that you're seeing is this picture in color right here, the picture on your notes. This is a stomata or a stomate, and it's holes in the leaves that open and close to allow the exchange of gases from inside that spongy layer that you made with your leaf diagrams last week with the outside air, the atmospheric air. So what are those gases? Oxygen? No, not oxygen. Plants don't take in oxygen for photosynthesis, correct? They take in carbon dioxide. And they also have to let out water vapor when the conditions are right, okay? It's almost like plant sweat. They open up these pores and not necessarily drips of water, but water vapor as a gas comes out. And plants absorb oxygen through their roots. They do need oxygen still for cellular respiration when the sun goes down, right? Oh, and you had a question, what is homeostasis? You were supposed to, at the bottom of the page, this is a review question. So you were supposed to look back on your memory and remember what homeostasis was. If you forget, that's one question you will have to do at the end of the notes. Okay, so here's that stomate, that stomata is plural. And this is a diagram, of course, so it opens and closes. These are called guard cells. When the guard cells are shrunken, they close the hole. And when they're swollen, they open the hole, which allows gases to come in and out. The hole itself is called the stoma, okay? And the cells that surround the hole are called guard cells. They guard the opening. Pretty neat that they have this adaptation. It's amazing what is there that you can't see and what is happening. We've all seen plants. This is Florida, for goodness sake. It's not like the middle of the desert where there's no plants. Well, there are plants in the desert, actually. But you know what I mean? Like green, like verdant green. Just go inland a little bit and there's jungle in Florida. Like impenetrable jungle in the Everglades and stuff like that. With plants everywhere. And people just take them for granted. But they're so complex and they have so many features about them. Like root systems. Did you know that there is just as much plant underground as there is above ground? It's hard to see because you can't expose all those roots, but or if you pull a weed out of the ground, you're ripping off the roots and leaving the roots in the ground. That's why sometimes plants grow back when you rip them at the roots. Even a tree will sometimes grow back if you cut it down at its base. The roots are still alive, so they may still sprout stems from the top. So that's really interesting. There's just as much plant underground as there is above ground. So what's the purpose of those roots? What's their function? They absorb water, obviously. That's the biggest function, most obvious function that everybody knows about. When you water a plant, you don't water the leaves, you water down here at the base. And so water is absorbed through these root hairs that stick out into the soil. They're microscopic. And then it's transported up. And it's controlled by absorbing, is by osmosis. And you have to define osmosis on page 2, slide 7. Osmosis was from cell transport chapter. So if you don't remember what osmosis is, you're required to go back into your notes or look it up later, okay, to fill in that blank. You know, I do take points off. I scan through your notes, and anything that's blank, I take points off. That's why some of you have 96s or 88s for your notes when you thought that you were going to get full credit. So watch out for those blanks, okay? Anchorage, they anchor the plant down. This is obvious too. Hurricanes don't blow all the plants away, just a few of them, a few of the weaker ones. And so the roots hold those plants in place. They also serve a purpose environmentally by keeping the ground where it is, right? So if that's why there's signs on the dunes, do not walk on the dunes at the beach, or do not pick the sea oats, because those plants are holding that dune together from washing away and from erosion, okay? So they also have that purpose in the environment. And of course, they store food that the plant makes in its leaves. Now the stem is the middle part of the plant. These are stems of, I believe these are called, they're some kind of reeds that grow in the water. Most reeds grow in the water or near the water. They have a very unique name, and they've been around. I know this plant has been around since before, since the time of the dinosaurs. It's pretty. I think it's called horsetail, or I don't know, something like that. But those are stems, just like bamboo stems, or the trunk of a tree, or the stem of any plant you can think of. Stems that you eat, like celery, those are stems. They use those cells, the xylem and the phloem, which we'll talk about later, we mentioned it before in this class, to transport sugars from the leaves down to the rest of the plant, so that those cells can get food, and water and minerals up from the roots to the leaves, so the leaves can be healthy and do their job of photosynthesis. They support the plant, right? And of course, some of them are used for storing food as well. For example, potato is a modified stem that grows underground that stores starches for the plant. So there are different tissues in plants, just like there are different tissues in us. Remember the level of organization? It was organelles, cells, tissues, and then organs, and then organ systems, and then an organism. That was from the last unit. So these are the plant tissues. Dermal is the skin or outer covering, which you did in your little diagram that you cut out and colored and pasted to the paper. Waxy coating that protects It stops from water loss, okay, and injury. The vascular system, that's the xylem and the phloem. We'll talk about those later. The ground tissue. Ground tissue is simply just the material that's in between the dermal and the vascular tissues. And then the meristematic tissue produces new cells by mitosis. So if I took this plant and I cut off right there, where this leaf touches the stem is called a meristem. And a new growth would come out of those leaf cuttings. You could already almost see, and a new top would grow. Happens all the time when people cut trees or when they harvest certain plants. I used to work in a hydroponic greenhouse as director of farming operations in Hillsborough County, north of Tampa, 22 years ago. And we would grow basil for hydroponically, no dirt. Just the roots were in like liquid with nutrients. It was really cool. And when they harvested the basil, they would not pull the whole plant out of the ground. They would snip it halfway down and then package it and send it to hotel restaurants and Disney World and places like that. And then the plant would grow back again. And then a couple weeks later, you'd come back and you'd trim it again so that you don't have to keep replanting. That's what meristematic tissue does. It grows new plants, really, new growths, both roots and stems in both directions. Really, plants are just amazing organisms. So this is just a breakdown of all the different systems: the dermal tissue, vascular tissue, ground tissue, and where they are. So the leaf, we did this. This should look familiar to you with the vascular bundle. Okay, we called it vascular bundle in our diagram. The dermal tissue, the ground tissue, then the spongy mesophyll, the spongy layer. That's what the ground tissue is. And then the lower with the stomates, the stomata. And then this is the stem with the different vascular tissue, all arranged. It's really easy to see when you cut a celery stalk. You can see them. And if you put it in like colored water and come back a few hours later, the leaves of the celery will be the color of whatever color you put in the water. And then the roots, which are very similar, but just arranged differently. So they all have the same tissues, they're just arranged differently. Now some plants have vascular tissues that move the fluids and materials through, but some don't. These are non-vascular plants. Mosses, algae, and these little things called liverworts. There's no warts and there's no liver. It's just what their name is. And these don't have vascular tissue. They're so small that they absorb all of their nutrients and all their water from right through their, epidermis. It's pretty wild. But then the vascular plants, they do have xylem and phloem. So ferns, conifers, and flowering plants. Any plant that has a flower is a flowering plant. Pine trees, conifers, don't. Okay, and you have a question in your notes on page 3, define conifer. So if you don't quite know what a conifer is and why it's called that, look it up. I gave you a hint just a moment ago. All right, so here are the vascular tissues, which we mentioned. So you have to label these in your notes. It's a diagram, the xylem and the phloem. The xylem transports water upward from the roots, because that's where plants get their water from, right? They get it from the roots. And minerals as well from the dirt. Minerals like nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium and calcium. Yes, plants need all of these things. They need quite a few. Magnesium, the photosynthetic structure of chloroplasts, the little organelles that capture solar energy to make sugar, they would not work without magnesium, a metal that's in the soil that they pull up atomically, right, very small, and they use it to build that structure. So it's really amazing. And then the phloem flows down. I know I spelled that wrong because I wanted to show you how you can remember the difference, because you know this is going to be on a test for this unit. It's probably going to be on your midterm. It's probably going to be on your final, your EOC. So that's how you can tell the difference between the xylem and phloem. Phloem flows down through these sieve plates, they're called, in between the vascular bundle. So this is kind of like your arteries and your veins, but for a plant. They go in different directions. Now, the phloem actually can go both ways, but for the most part, just know it's a two-way movement. Just know that the major difference is that xylem is up and phloem flows down, flow, okay? And if you miss anything, if for some reason you have a mini vacation in your brain, you know that you can come back to these notes because the link is on Google Classroom, okay? So now we're at the bottom of page 3, slide 13, and we're going to talk about some reproductive adaptations of seed plants, but we're not going to get too deep into it right now because we do have to talk about sexual reproduction as well as asexual reproduction, but that is a different unit. I'm just talking about the anatomy of plants right now, okay? So we're not going to get too deep into that material. But I am going to show you just some of the adaptations. So they have pollen that's airborne. It's essentially the plant's sperm. This is the male reproductive, not seed, cell. There, couldn't think of the word. Why can't I think of the word cell? And then seeds are fertilized eggs when the sperm meets with the ovary of the flower, of the female part of the flower. Cones do it a little differently, but they're still sexual. And of course the flower parts we'll talk about later. And what's going on here? This tractor is bumping into a tree in, I guess, the springtime when it's covered in pollen. So, and that's, poof, all the pollen is released. And some people are really affected by that in certain seasons of the year. Okay, so now we're on slide 4. Sorry, page 4, slide 14. What are the characteristics of flowers? This is the reproductive organ of all flowering plants. Sometimes the flowers are so small you don't even see them, or they're different weird shapes, or they're green and they match with the leaves and they're very hard to see, or they're very tiny. So they produce the male gametes, the sperm, and the female gametes, eggs, and to provide a structure for fertilization. The seeds are the reproductive structure consisting of a plant embryo and its stored food. So when you eat a seed like a sunflower seed, or a nut like a walnut or a cashew nut or something like that, or even a peanut, which is not really a nut because a nut grows on a tree, but anyway, you're eating the embryo of a plant. You're eating, like a fetus almost of a plant, okay? The ability for all of these seeds to grow into a forest of sunflowers is there, but it's also food and it tastes good. So don't feel guilty when you're eating the embryos of plants. And the fruit is the ovary. So when you bite into an apple or a strawberry or a cucumber or a tomato, you are eating the ovary of a plant. And inside are all the little baby embryos, all those seeds. Makes you think about it a little bit differently, doesn't it? Many fruits also help disperse seeds to new locations. Now, how does a fruit disperse a seed? Think about that. We're going to give you the answer momentarily, okay? So here's the general structure of flowers, and there's a lot to fill out on your paper, so start right now, please. Even you. Yeah, you. Start right now, okay? Bottom of page 4, diagram. So, the reproductive parts. The male parts are the stamen. They contain this filament and an anther. And on the anther are where the pollen is found, the male reproductive cells, okay? The female part is called the pistil. This is the pistil from this point all the way down to here, okay? This whole structure is called the pistil. Not pistol, L-O-L, like a gun, pistil. It contains the stigma, which is a sticky part where the pollen touches, the style, which is this long piece, and then the ovary at the bottom where the eggs are, okay? And where the pollen will eventually go. So the pollen is blowing from other flowers, other plants, could be from miles away, and it sticks. Some are self-fertilizing. Some of them, you can just take pollen from here and it'll touch that and they'll be self-fertilized. They'll essentially be clones of their original, but oftentimes no. So when the pollen blows in, it sticks to the sticky part and a tube forms. This pollen tube forms down here, and the pollen travels all the way down and gets to the ovule and fertilizes that plant. Then the flower will die and a fruit will form, which will carry the offspring to the next generation, or not if somebody eats it. So again, pollen, each grain contains 2 sperm cells. That's why they're so big. Stamen and pistil contain the sex cells of the flowering plants, and then flowering plants produce fertilized seeds. Fertilized seeds. Only a fertilized seed will germinate and grow into a new plant. Hopefully you got that all down. I'll give you another few seconds here. These notes are kind of quick. All right, moving on. Plant processes. So again, this is all introduction. This is all just the basics, okay? So you have to fill in the function parts. Photosynthesis creates food energy from sunlight, but oh my goodness, if we don't know that by now, we are not knowing much in this class. So hopefully you know that by now. Cellular respiration is what plants do when the sun goes down. They do what we do. At night and in non-photosynthetic cells of the plant uses its own food, its own glucose that it made to carry on its processes. Growth, repair. Some plants only flower at night. Their flowers only open at nighttime. And then, of course, animals adapt to that. So you get certain species of bats and moths that come in and feed on the flowers at night to pollinate them. Transpiration, that was that sweating from the leaves I told you about before, from the stomates, from the stomata, the openings in the bottom of the leaves. That's called transpiration. It's like perspiration, that's sweat from a plant, transpiration. And it actually takes part in the water cycle, which I believe we touched on when we learned about water in the first unit of this class. And then something called tropisms. Tropisms, I think, are the most interesting thing that plants do. It almost makes you think that they have a brain, which we know they don't. They don't even have nerve cells, but there is theories that they can feel pain. So when you're out there just ripping apart a plant for no reason because you want to, or chopping up a plant or pulling leaves off a plant, just know that you are causing that plant harm and you are triggering tropisms, and you're triggering hormones to be released and all kinds of stuff when you do that. And I can teach a whole class on just that, but let's just find out what a tropism is first, okay? So phototropism, all right? What does photo mean? Photosynthesis, we know, means making from light, so that means light, right? So this is when plants turn toward the light or grow toward the light. Sunflowers are famous for it because a sunflower will go down, it'll be like start in the morning over here, and then when the sun comes up over there, the sunflower will turn and face the sun. That's why it gets its name. And then as the sun tracks across the sky, the sunflower will turn toward the sun. And then when the sun sets, the whole process starts over again. It's really amazing. So if you have any plants in your home, you know that they will grow toward the light. They won't grow away from the light. Gravitropism, that's growing usually against gravity, or if it's the roots will grow toward gravity. Plants know to send roots down and stems up. How do they know that? Okay, so gravity. And I'll show you a picture here, right here. So if you were to hang a plant upside down, like a tomato plant here, for example, it will start to grow. The stem will turn and grow up because stems don't grow down. And you'll get a crooked plant if you wanted to grow a crooked plant for some reason. Thigmotropism. Plants that have tendrils, little grabbing like vines, okay? They will reach out, and when they touch something, they'll wrap around it. Not really fast, not like in the movies where you have man-eating plants and stuff like that, but still, climbing vines and plants will do that. And then hydrotropism means growing toward water. So the roots will search out water sources in the ground. Certain trees called poplar trees, if you plant them too close to your house, the roots will actually go into your water pipes and clog up your water pipes. And you'll have to redo your whole water system. So here's another example of gravitropism, okay? So this tree fell down, and years ago, and it never gave up, right? Its stems, these of course died because they probably got broken when it fell, but these were still alive, and there was just enough root left for it to get water and nutrients, and so the stems grew up and towards the light and away from the earth, and the roots probably kept, new roots grew down. So there's a question about that. Slide 17. How can tropism of that tree serve as an example for you? So little side thought there, okay? It's kind of like the story I told you last Friday about me when I fell at the fire truck. I never gave up, right? All right. Plant adaptations. Number 1, there's a couple of these because we only have 2 slides left. So methods to disperse seeds. So how do plants get their babies away from them? Okay, humans do it. They send them to college. But plants don't have that. So, and if you drop all your babies right next to you, then the babies, when they grow, are going to steal your food and your water and your sunlight. So most plants don't want that. Most plants want their babies to grow elsewhere, right? So coconuts washing up on the shore, they can survive that, floating around in salt water for a very long time. And when they wash up in a storm, they'll sprout and they'll grow. So adaptability to harsh environments, the ability to fly. Yes, these are maple tree seeds, helicopters. You may have seen them. They don't really have too many of them down here in Florida, but up north they do. And they just fly like a helicopter and they fly away. It's really amazing. These are mangrove seeds. They also float around in the tide. You probably saw those at the beach lots of times. Yummy tasting fruit that birds and animals like to eat. And then when they eat it, they move. Birds and animals, birds and other animals, mammals like raccoons and opossums and foxes and all those critters, they move away. They don't stay there at the plant. And what do when they eat? After they eat, they poop, exactly. And oftentimes don't digest the seeds. And the seeds come out in their poop and grow. And the poop is the fertilizer. Nature is just amazing. And we've all seen dandelions. And then, this little doggy, he got covered in those hitchhikers. When you walk through the weeds and you got to pick them off of your clothes and pick them off of your shoes, and they're really annoying. And they'll come in all different kinds. The plants have little hooks on them. And they hook onto animal fur, and the animal walks away, and then they fall off eventually. It could be miles from their home, where their parent plant was. And believe it or not, that is where the idea of Velcro came from plants being able to grasp onto fur. And then the second kind of adaptation are just a multitude of different things here. We have desert plants that can take very dry, arid conditions, no rain for a very long time. They also have thorns for protection from being devoured. Carnivorous plants, very unique. They have to live in an acidic environment, in a bog environment, like swamp, but just more acidic. Anyway, so when you raise one of these, many people buy these, but then they die. They don't know how to keep the soil right, okay? The ability to live in water, like these water lilies. We see these growing in ponds all around Florida. And poisonous plants, like this poison ivy. Leaves of 3, let it be, right? If you see leaves of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, you don't touch it. Because typically it will be poison ivy, poison oak, or poison sumac. And if you touch that, most people, not maybe everybody, but most people will get a very bad rash, a reaction to those. So there's a question on your notes. Describe how poisons or spines help a plant's survivability. Okay, and that's our notes for plants.